The sun scorched the plains of Canaan. The dry, cracked ground reflected the condition of the people of Israel, a broken, humiliated nation oppressed for 20 long years under the cruel rule of Jabin, king of Canaan. But it was the name of Sisera, his general, that struck terror into every Israelite village. Riding in 900 iron chariots, he mercilessly crushed any resistance. Each attack left behind a trail of blood, pain, and silence. It was in this setting that Jael lived, a Kenite. A woman. Her people were descendants of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and lived in tents in the desert in peaceful alliance with Jabin. She was not an Israelite, but she knew the God of Israel, for her people had journeyed with the Hebrews since the days of Moses. Jael grew up hearing stories of the sea parting, manna falling from heaven, and the walls of Jericho collapsing at the sound of trumpets. Deep in her heart, she believed in this God, even while living surrounded by pagan alliances. Jael often gazed at the horizon while drawing water from the well. Her soul carried a weight she couldn't explain. Why does God allow so much suffering, she wondered. She saw Israelite women passing by her tents with wounded or orphaned children. She heard distant cries when Sisera marched with his army, and within her a growing conflict stirred, between the safety her position provided and the injustice she could no longer ignore. Her husband, Heber, silently honored the alliance with Jabin. A good man, but passive. Jael, on the other hand, was restless. Every movement she made, every whispered prayer as night fell, revealed a sensitive spirit, attuned to the stirring of God. One night, the sky filled with heavy clouds. The wind howled violently among the tents, and Jael felt something different. It wasn't just a storm. It was as if heaven itself was about to intervene. She didn't know what was coming, but she sensed something divine was about to happen, and her life would never be the same. While the people cried out for deliverance and the armies of Israel began to mobilize in secret, Jael remained in her place, among tents and simple chores. But even in the most unlikely places, God prepares the hearts of those he will use. The hills of Ephraim witnessed an unusual sight. Among a conquered and weary people, a woman rose as judge and prophetess. Her name was Deborah, and her words were like fire in the darkness. She did not lead by strength, but by divine authority. And when she spoke, the elders fell silent, and the people listened. "Rise, Barak," Deborah said firmly to the Israelite commander. "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Go to Mount Tabor with 10,000 men. He will deliver Sisera into your hands." Barak hesitated. The bloody reputation of Sisera still gripped the hearts of men. He agreed under one condition. "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not go." Deborah, unshaken, replied, "I will go with you. But know this, the honor will not be yours. God will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." That prophecy would echo all the way to Jael in her desert tent where destiny waited in silence. Meanwhile, Jael continued her daily routine. But every movement was followed by a sense of unrest, something in the sky, in the wind's whisper, in travelers' conversations, pointed to change. She heard men speak of an uprising, of a woman judging Israel, and of a coming war. Even though she was not at the battlefront, Jael was at the center of God's will. That morning she prayed differently. She didn't ask for peace. She asked for direction, for courage, for revelation. At Jabin's camp, Sisera prepared his war chariots. He was confident. His enemies were weak, disorganized, led by a woman and a hesitant commander. To him, it would be just another victory. What he didn't know was that his fate lay not in the hands of soldiers, but in the hands of a woman who didn't even wield a sword. Above, the clouds thickened. In the desert, Jael tended her tent. On the mountain, Barak prepared to obey. Each person was in their place, and God, silently, was moving every piece to fulfill his will. What are your thoughts on this story so far? Leave your opinion in the comments. The clouds burst violently, lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the earth. The Kishon Valley, where Sisera had gathered his war chariots, turned into mud. The 900 iron chariots, once symbols of invincibility, became helplessly stuck. The ground, which once trembled under the weight of iron wheels, now swallowed the pride of a mighty army. Barak, with his 10,000 men, came down from Mount Tabor with renewed courage. But it was not he who fought, it was the Lord who waged war for Israel. Sisera's army was overwhelmed by panic, confusion, screams, retreat. It was God's judgment in motion. Sisera, the feared general, saw his strength collapse in minutes. In desperation, he jumped from his stuck chariot and fled on foot. Exhausted, filthy, wounded in pride and soul. His feet were cut by desert stones. His breath came in fearful gasps. With every step, Deborah's words echoed in his mind. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Could it be? Was it possible? He shook his head, trying to silence the prophecy. The sun was already beginning to set when he saw in the distance a group of tents. The banner was familiar, the house of Heber the Kenite. There, peace with Jabin remained. There, he would be safe. Sisera stumbled toward the entrance of the tent. He barely had the strength to call out, and it was Jael who appeared. Her face remained calm. She recognized the general immediately. What she had been sensing for weeks was now standing before her eyes. "Come in, my lord, do not be afraid," she said calmly, opening the tent flap. Sisera entered, collapsing in exhaustion onto the rugs. Jael covered him with a woolen blanket. He was trembling, sweating cold. He asked for water. She gave him warm milk. He felt safe. He didn't know that this simple gesture was the beginning of his end. "Stand at the entrance of the tent. If anyone comes and asks if someone is here, say no," he whispered before falling into a deep sleep. Jael sat nearby, watching the man asleep. Night fell in absolute silence, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Inside her, a battle was being fought. What did God expect from her? Could it be that she was the woman of the prophecy? Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from awareness. She, a woman among tents, would be the instrument of divine judgment. God spoke through Deborah, acted with Barak, and now would manifest through her hands. Thank you for staying with me this far. Your presence is truly special, and I assure you, the best is yet to come. Darkness took over the desert. The stars, usually bright, seemed hidden behind thick clouds. Inside the tent, silence reigned, heavy, thick like a veil before judgment. Jael rose slowly. Every movement was calculated, reverent, like one stepping on holy ground. Sisera was in deep sleep. The warm milk, the exhaustion from the escape, the certainty of safety had led him into the deepest slumber. He did not know, but he lay at the edge of eternity. His face, once a symbol of cruelty and arrogance, now looked fragile, almost human. Jael looked at him with steady eyes. There was no hatred in her heart, but there was a clear purpose, and it came from God. She walked to the corner of the tent and picked up a tent peg, the kind used to secure the shelter against desert winds. In her other hand, she held a wooden hammer. Her hands, used to daily chores, now trembled slightly, not from cowardice, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Jael knelt beside the general. She took a deep breath. Her eyes closed for a moment. She prayed in silence. "Lord, may your will be done. I am but dust, but I want to be an instrument of justice." Then she positioned the peg beside Sisera's temple. The first strike was firm, strong, determined. A muffled sound, almost sacred. Sisera's body shook, then stilled. No scream was heard, no alarm, only silence. There, inside a simple tent, the God of Israel fulfilled his word. It wasn't the war chariots that decided the battle. It wasn't the cries on the sea battlefield that sealed the fate. It was the courageous act of an obedient woman, used by God at a decisive moment. Jael's face bowed to the ground. There was no glory or euphoria, only reverence. Outside, the wind began to blow again. The clouds started to dissipate. A new time was about to dawn for Israel. Moments later, hurried footsteps approached. It was Barak, still in pursuit of the enemy general. Jael went out to meet him. Her eyes met the commander's, and she spoke simply, "Come in, and I will show you the man you are looking for." Barak entered. Faced with Sisera's lifeless body, he said nothing. He simply fell to his knees, fully aware that this woman had been the arm of God that day. The next morning dawned with a lightness the people of Israel hadn't known in a long time. The news spread like fire through the hills. Sisera was dead, and more shocking still, he'd been killed by the hands of a woman, Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. While the people celebrated the victory, Deborah and Barak composed one of the most beautiful and prophetic songs in the Bible, a hymn of praise to God's justice and the faithfulness of those who rise for him. The words were strong, poetic, and spiritually profound. But one verse in particular touched everyone's heart. "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women." Judges 5:24. Jael's name, once unknown, echoed through the valleys and hills as a symbol of quiet courage. Her tent became a living memory of God's faithfulness. Though she was not directly part of Israel's tribes, she was used as a central piece in the deliverance of the chosen people. This revealed a deep truth. God does not look at position, but at disposition. Jael never sought glory. She never imagined she would enter history as the protagonist of one of the most astonishing feats in the biblical narrative. But there, among simple cloths, warm milk, and a wooden peg, she wrote an eternal chapter in God's plan. The people of Israel, freed from Jabin's oppression, lived in peace for 40 years after that victory. The memory of Deborah's song was sung from generation to generation, and Jael became an example of faith that does not depend on pulpits, armies, or rank, but on spiritual sensitivity and obedience. In the tents of the desert beside her people, Jael continued her life with the same simplicity as always. But now, her soul carried the mark of an encounter with eternal purpose. She understood the weight and the beauty of having been used by God to fulfill a promise. And today, millennia later, Jael's name lives on. Her story challenges us to hear God's voice, even in the most unlikely of places. She teaches us that courage, faith, and obedience do not depend on titles, but on a heart that is willing. Maybe you, like Jael, are in silence, hidden among life's tents. But do not underestimate what God can do through you. He still raises unlikely people to fulfill eternal promises. In the heart of the desert where few look, God reveals his greatest works. Jael's story didn't begin on a battlefield or in a royal palace. It began in obscurity, in a tent, amid ordinary tasks. She had no sword, no army, but she had something that in God's eyes was more powerful than any weapon, a heart sensitive to his will. How often does humanity see strength where God sees weakness? And how much strength does he reveal in those the world insists on ignoring? Jael was invisible to men, but she was known in heaven. While kings conspired and generals marched, God watched that woman in the silence of the desert sands. Jael's life reminds us that God doesn't need visibility to act. He sees willing hearts. He sees the mother who prays in silence, the elderly person who cries out for justice, the faithful servant who, despite a heavy routine, still believes. God raises the unlikely to confound the strong. Jael could have remained passive. She could have said, "It's not my problem." After all, her tribe was at peace with Jabin. She could have shut her tent and ignored the war. But something inside her was stirred. The pain of God's people was her pain too. Maybe today you feel like Jael, forgotten on the margins with limited resources. But it is in these humble hearts that God finds fertile ground. He doesn't require perfection, only surrender. And when he finds that, he can turn a simple tent peg into an instrument of victory. This is where Jael's story gains its true power. She didn't just kill a man, she killed the human logic that says only the great accomplish great deeds. And she engraved in history the lesson that silent obedience can change the fate of a nation. So if you've been living in anonymity, in silence, in hidden prayer, don't lose heart. God knows every detail of your life. He knows where you live. He sees what you carry in your heart, and at the right time, he can make you a channel of deliverance. The God of Jael is still the same today. He continues to choose the unlikely, not so that we receive glory, but so that the world may know it is he who acts, he who wins, he who leads history. Jael's name began to be spoken among elders, among warriors, among families who once wept under oppression. But she herself didn't seek recognition. She returned to her routine as if nothing had happened. The tent, the milk, the well water, but something in her spirit had been changed forever. Heber, her husband, watched in silence. Perhaps he didn't fully understand what his wife had done. Perhaps he felt torn between the old alliance with Jabin and the new direction heaven had ordained. But there in the desert silence, he realized something greater was unfolding. God had passed by that tent. When the prophetess Deborah heard of Jael's deed, she did not hesitate to include her name in the song of victory. To Deborah, Jael wasn't just a brave woman. She was an instrument of God's will, the exact fulfillment of a bold prophecy. That's why her name was exalted. Blessed among women who dwell in tents. This kind of honor doesn't come from men, it comes from heaven. Today many seek human applause, likes and fame, but Jael's story teaches us that true recognition comes from God. And that kind of recognition is never lost. When God decides to honor someone, no crowd can erase it, and no obscurity can prevent it. And more, Jael's victory didn't lie in the eyes that saw her, but in the impact her obedience caused. Through her, the people found peace again. Through her, God showed that he doesn't depend on status, position, or favorable circumstances. Jael's honor wasn't born from vanity, but from faithfulness. How many times are we not recognized for doing what's right? How often do we act with integrity, serve, help, and the world doesn't notice? The lesson here is simple yet profound. God sees, and he rewards at the right time. Heaven recorded Jael's act, and even today, centuries later, her name is mentioned among the heroes of faith. No trophies, no titles, no stage, but with an eternal place in Israel's salvation story. If you've been walking with God and feel that no one notices, remember, the honor that comes from God is worth more than any human recognition. He sees every step, every tear, every silent act of obedience. Just like Jael, remain steadfast. Stay sensitive to the Spirit's voice, because when you act by faith, even in small things, heaven moves. And in the right time, honor will come, not by the hands of men, but by the hands of God himself. After Sisera's death, Jael continued living among the tents, in a place that at first glance seemed unchanged. But something invisible had been transformed forever. Peace had returned to Israel, and more importantly, heaven had revealed itself through an ordinary woman. Still, not everything was simple after the act that marked her life. Jael faced suspicious glances, whispered comments, doubts from within her own tribe. Did she act on her own? Some murmured. Wasn't it dangerous to shelter enemies and then kill them? Others questioned. But Jael didn't seek the people's approval. She knew her peace didn't come from human understanding, but from the conviction that she had obeyed the God who sees all. She often sat at the entrance of her tent and watched shepherds pass by, children play, families now free from oppression. She knew that, in some way, she had been part of that change, and that was enough. Her days returned to their routine. Fresh milk, woven fabrics, patching the tent's canvas. But her spirit was more alert than ever. Every desert breeze reminded her of that night, not with guilt, not with glory, but with a deep sense of reverence. God had chosen her, and that would never be taken away. Maybe your tent peg today is something that seems small, a piece of advice given in love, a difficult decision that honors God, a firm stance in the face of opposition. Don't underestimate it. God still uses tent pegs to win spiritual battles. When Jael held that piece of wood, she didn't see it as a weapon. She saw it as purpose. That changes everything. Her story invites us to look around and ask, what do I have in my hands that God can use? It's not about greatness, it's about availability. It's not about applause, it's about mission. And it's not about worthiness, it's about grace. Jael didn't act on impulse. She aligned herself with the move of God, and when that happens, even the most ordinary objects become sacred. You don't need to be great, you need to be obedient, because when God touches the ordinary with his presence, the impossible happens. Jael's story ends as it began, in silence. She didn't go to palaces or plazas. She didn't give speeches. She didn't demand rewards. She simply returned to her life as a woman of the desert, living among tents, goat's milk, and the ropes that tied fabric to the rocky ground. But inside her, something had changed forever. She knew it, and heaven knew it too. Because what God does through someone is not measured by the noise of victory, but by the weight of eternity. By acting in faith, Jael changed the course of a war. She saved a generation. She fulfilled a prophecy. And most of all, she honored the voice of God at a time when the whole world expected her to remain silent. That is true greatness. Jael wasn't a priestess, a prophetess, or a formal leader. She was a woman among tents. But by making room for God to act in her life, she was used as a precise arrow against oppression. God didn't choose her for her strength, but for her readiness. And that speaks deeply to us. How many times have we felt unimportant, that what we do is too small? How many times have we missed the chance to obey, waiting for a mission that seemed more noble, more visible, or more spiritual? Jael's life cries out against that. She shows us that the invisible is also sacred. That faithfulness in the right place, at the right time, with the right heart, can change history. Maybe you're wrestling with difficult decisions. Maybe you feel God is calling you to something outside your comfort zone. Maybe, like Jael, you find a tent peg in your hand, an opportunity to act in faith, to take a stand, to obey even, without full understanding. If so, remember her. Remember that it was in the silence of the tent, not on the battlefield, that God chose to fulfill his plan. Remember that courage is not found in the shout, but in the firm decision to obey, even when everything says not to. Jael's faith is a faith of action, a faith that doesn't wait for human approval to obey the voice of God. And that kind of faith is still possible and still necessary today. May your life be like Jael's, a space where God can act, even if no one sees, even if no one applauds, even if it's hard. Because the eyes of the Lord roam throughout the earth, looking for hearts that are fully available to him. And when he finds them, no army, no king, no oppressor can stand.